Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the Cyber Gizmo, I'm going to be taking a look at a piece of open source software called FreeRADIUS, right after this. So I wanted to do this. I use this in my own home network for a lot of different things, but I wanted to explain to you what it was and how it works. This package is available both in a standalone form, and if you're using pfSense, it's also available inside of there as well. So there's a lot of different options on how you can do this, but let's talk a little bit about what it is first. So it was initially released, a long time ago, 1999, back when ISPs were still dial-up, and and now the current release was, I think it came out in March, late March of last year, and it's 3.0.21 is the current release of the software. So, but what is FreeRADIUS? It was developed by Alan de Kock and Michael van Schmurenberg, if I get that right. And what they wanted to do was they had been, I think Michael had written Citrion, and Citrion was also a Radius server. It's now defunct, but what they really wanted was something that was modular, that they could then add on new features over time and hopefully entice additional developers to come and help work on the project, since they could then break it up and pass out the work to the different developers to then come back and assemble it. So FreeRADIUS is really a high-performance remote authentication dial-in user service. It's a rather obsolete name, but it still has an important role to play in security, as we'll talk about today. It's not, the name is obsolete, the software is not. FreeRADIUS is a centralized scalable authentication, authorization, and accounting service. So AAA is typically how you refer to those. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those are when we get to that in this discussion today. But FreeRADIUS supports a number of protocols, some of which are obsolete, some of which are insecure today, but they're still there. I don't know if anybody is still using some of the earlier protocols, but it has PAP, CHAP, MS Chat version 1, MS Chat version 2. It also uses PEEP. It also has EAP TTLS and EAP GTC and EAP MD5. There's and of course, being modular, they can add on additional features, like they just in the last release announced support for TLS. So yeah, so that's also a part of the system. So FreeRADIUS also supports user definition and a number of mechanisms that you can use to do that. You can store user account information in flat files, although that's not probably the most expedient, but it's probably okay for, as long as you keep the directory locked down. But it's probably okay if you have a handful of users, but if you start getting into, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of users, you'll probably find that access is going to be really slow, and you'll probably want to move to something like a SQL database or an LDAP server to be able to back in the user accounts. So, and it also supports a number of databases such as MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, etc. There's also an ODBC plugin, so if you have one of the databases that are not directly supported, you can use that. And of course, as I said, you can also back end it with an LDAP server as well. But the architecture of FreeRADIUS is client-server, so it expects to have a server component and then some client that's talking to it. And there's a number of clients that are available both in hardware and software that allow that kind of support. So is FreeRADIUS still a thing? It's been around for so long. Is it still in use? Does anybody still use this thing? Yeah, absolutely. Corporations that are using enterprise Wi-Fi use it for user authentication before a user can access a Wi-Fi network, and that's usually done through WPA Enterprise, and there's a number of options in there, some of which are, none of which are totally secure, but some are more secure than others. The problem with WPA and some of those and so that ilk is that it's closed source, and you probably have seen how quickly those authentication mechanisms can be broken. So yeah, the problem is not FreeRADIUS. The problem is the Wi-Fi consortium, which is all totally closed up, and they really need to open that up and let the security experts come in and define the protocols instead of letting those people do it, because they've had 3 tries and they have failed on all 3. So yeah. User OpenVPN also uses FreeRADIUS as an alternative to the AAA. So you can back in OpenVPN and use it for account authentication if you wish. Kerberos also can be used with AAA parts of FreeRADIUS. Kerberos can also work in reverse, in that you can set this stuff up like, well, we'll talk about the proxy, but you can set these things up in a stack so that each one is providing some layer of service in your organization, so you can kind of build up a more secure operating environment from many different components. You can also use it to authenticate VoIP communication. So if you require users to authenticate before accessing a VoIP phone, you can certainly do that with FreeRADIUS as well. Okay, so great, but who still uses it? So cellular network providers that have millions of users, they still use it. Small wireless internet service providers, or WISPs, they still use it. Enterprise networks that are implementing network access control protocols like NAC or NAS, they typically implement the 802.1.x standard or 802.1x standard in order to, before allowing a user to open a network access, and they will go through a FreeRADIUS server in order to authenticate the user before granting access to the network. So yeah, and so that allows them to ring fence the networks and also give them some capability for monitoring who and when the networks were accessed. So why would you want to use it? Well, first of all, it's an open source solution. It's scalable. You can load balance multiple FreeRADIUS servers. You can also have them in a failover mode if you need that. There's broad vendor support for FreeRADIUS out as clients, which can service a FreeRADIUS server. So if you're using appliances, I wish IoT devices would start using it. It would really help a lot if they did. But it allows you some separation of your security from your communications. So, and rather than allowing access to the network first, and then you go to an authentication server like LDAP, because you can't get to LDAP without having access to the network, FreeRADIUS prevents access to the network until that user has authenticated. So it allows you to separate those concerns, puts it in the correct order. It is adaptable to, well, it's kind of a broad statement. It is adaptable to a lot of security products that are out there. I mean, it's been around for so long that most vendors of software that are in this space at least offer some support for it. So, okay, great. This sounds good, but how do I use this thing? What can I use it for? Well, there's a lot of different ways you can use this. So the first thing is, let's say you were in you can use this in a home environment. You can use this in a corporate environment as well. Let's say you're in a corporate environment that has tens of thousands of users, and maybe you have a mix of contractors and maybe you have a mix of full-time employees, and the contractor pool is dynamic. I mean, those people are coming and going depending upon the length of the contract. So you want something that's flexible enough that allows you to add and delete users from a menu-driven system, for example, and a database-driven user queries can be accomplished inside of FreeRADIUS. So it is possible to set up that kind of system behind which manages the user pool. And that user pool could then be used for access to the network, access to VPNs, access to VoIP, all that stuff, and Wi-Fi as well. So what about a company that wants to authenticate before allowing access to the network? Well, as I mentioned, it supports 802.1x. 802.1x. and that can be used to authenticate the user before it allows them to join the network. So it has it in the right order. Instead of LDAP, you authenticate the user to the app. You're really authenticating on LDAP. You're really authenticating to the application, not to the hardware device, which in my mind is backwards. So, but anyway, proxy. So proxies are when you want to have a stack of security applications such as LDAP, Kerberos. And maybe you have Active Directory or something like that you want to be able to put into the mix. And so you have each of these things providing a level of capability and access before granting the next level. So, yeah, and FreeRADIUS allows you to do that because of its modular design. Also, one other use case might be in auditing. If you have a free and open network, you're allowing people to just willy-nilly grab onto the network and start using it, including hackers. So by inserting FreeRADIUS into it, first of all, they would have to have a valid account in order to get granted access to the network. But also, you would have a mechanism by which to track when users were on and accessing the network. So. And if you had it deep enough, you could also monitor what services that they were accessing as well. So, yeah, I mean, you can monitor things like data stores, HTTP, NAS. Now, when we're talking about NAS here, we're not talking about network attached storage. We're talking about network access servers. So, and that would be in conjunction with FreeRADIUS. Also, VoIP and VPNs also can be monitored as well. So, those are things that are helpful and trying to maintain a security posture for an organization, or if you're concerned about it at home as well. So you can do that. Now we talked a little bit about this, but is WPA3 Enterprise secure? Well, sorta. Clearly, WPA3 Personal is not secure. There's all kinds of ways to be able to gain access to a WPA3 personal network. WPA3 Enterprise using EAP PWD is also not secure. So there is WPA3 Enterprise SAE, which is simultaneous access, but you have to be careful with that one. There's one that if you have both the personal and the enterprise turned on for the same Wi-Fi network, you'll end up in SAE transition mode. And in that case, PSKs, or the personal keys, the pre-shared keys, will take precedence over the SAE. And so you could inadvertently be less secure on your network than you think you are. So just be aware of that. SAE is more secure than the either the EAP PWD or the EP or the personal. There's also a newer mechanism called WP3 Enterprise Suite B, and that's a little more secure than the SAE. But can you really say that it's secure? No, same problem. I mean, it's the same organization that's running this, and they do not open their their software is not open source. It is not open and available for anyone to look at. They do the development, they make the mistakes, and they never correct them. So, yeah, that's been a long-term problem with that group. So, what modules does FreeRADIUS offer? There's a bunch of them. I'll just give you some examples. So, there's FreeRADIUS KRV5, which allows you to integrate Kerberos. There's LDAP, which allows you to integrate the LDAP servers into this if you want those to be your backend store for your user accounting. You can also use MySQL, there's Postgres, there's Oracle, and there's also the ODBC modules, which allows you to link into data sources that provide ODBC support. So, yeah, what does it run on? So, FreeRADIUS is pretty widespread in its support. I mean, you have Linux, it runs on Red Hat, it runs on Debian, it runs on Ubuntu, it runs on Arch, it runs on a number of things, and you'll probably find a precompiled package in your libraries already. So, and it's probably going to be 3.0.21, at least it should be by this time. It also runs on BSD, and as I mentioned, it is a module under pfSense. Yes, it has been around on pfSense for quite some time, that you can then plug in, and I think it offers a number of ways to use it, including OpenVPN and also NAS. macOS has support for it, as well as there's a version for Windows, and I think that's called FreeRADIUS. Yeah, you'd have to go probably Google it. It is not, you won't be able to download it from the FreeRADIUS page that you normally download for Linux and the source code for that. But yes, the source code is also available if you want to compile it. I ran it originally on Raspberry Pi, so there is an ARM version of it that is supplied as part of the packages that come with the Raspberry Pi as well. So yeah, it's pretty easy to get it. It's not that hard. So how do you get started? So I'm going to put a link below to the manual. There's a manual that's called the FreeRADIUS Technical Guide. And in there, it'll give you a lot more description than I did. It goes through the steps to set it up, install it, get it working. One thing about FreeRADIUS that's really nice, unlike other open source software, is it comes pre-configured with something that works. So the configuration that you get after you install the package will actually run. So then you can go in and modify it and change it to what you need, whether you're going to do NAS or Wi-Fi support or whatever, or OpenVPN, whatever additional features you're adding. But they always advise, and it's always good advice to do this, is you run the server in debug mode, and then you make one change at a time and make sure that you didn't break the config. There is a number of configurations. There's the configuration for the protocol. There's the configurations for the policies. So, and yeah, the policies can be a bit tricky, but the technical guide will help steer you clear of some of the rocks in the waters there, and it'll make it a lot easier for you to do that. When I went through mine to set it up to manage the Wi-Fi and also the OpenVPN traffic that was coming through, it took about maybe an hour after understanding what I was doing. I mean, I took about a half a day to actually learn it, and then it probably took about an hour to actually get it up and running. But I just took my time and went through and did an iterative, I'll make this change, we'll see how that works, and then we'll make this change. And then, yeah, I broke it a couple times, but it's just mostly because of typos in the config files. So what's kind of the next step here? What do I tend to do? I don't think I have enough time to actually go through this today. What I'd like to do is to come back and do one probably should do one for a standalone server and do one for pfSense. So I'll probably do that. If there's something that you guys want to see in specifics, I'll probably hook up a database to it. And I don't know, I had an LDAP that was running at one time. I took it down. It wasn't really helping me much, other than saving me some time to reset passwords. But now that I have that all figured out in Ansible, it's not a really big deal anymore. And the overhead of an LDAP server was kind of silly. So I don't need that anymore. And I don't run Windows, so if you're expecting me to do an Active Directory one, not going to happen. Sorry about that. Kerberos is a possibility, might do that. Kerberos it's a little rigorous to set up, but it's not too bad. And then you can see how that works and how the ticketing system will work with FreeRADIUS when you have the authentications pieced out like that. So that's all I had for today. Hope you enjoyed this. Yeah, let me know in the comments below if you are using something like a Radius server. Now, I will say one thing before I get out of here is if you go to their site, go to the FreeRADIUS site, and you look through some of the statistics on how many people are using FreeRADIUS and what some of the other people are using and how many installations they have, bear in mind that information was collected way back in 2006. So yeah, they have not done another study. And the problem with FreeRADIUS is it's normally deployed on the back end of a network, so it's not visible to the outside, which is a good thing. So yeah, it's a little hard to count those instances up like you could like a web server or an OpenVPN server, for example, because you can't spot them. not typically. At least you shouldn't be able to. But they have some information there about Cisco ACS being like 1/3 in the market. Cisco ACS is a dead product and has been for a long time. And then they talk about Microsoft's, I think it's their Internet Advanced Security, IAS. Yeah, that one's still supported, but I haven't really seen anything new in their literature since about 2017, so I don't know what Microsoft's plans are for that. I know that it's still there. Maybe you guys know more about it than I do. I just don't run Windows, so I can't tell you. There was also some references to some really old products like OpenRadius, which is dead, and of course Citrion, which is also dead. So yeah, I would take that information on how many it's used and what the competition is with a grain of salt, because it's all out of date. Anyway, that's all I had for today. Hope you enjoyed this, and as always, please like and subscribe. And to my Patreons, thank you so much for your support. It means a lot. It helps me get hardware in and be able to do some testing with things that I normally would not be able to do. So I really appreciate it when you guys are signing up for that. Anyway, that's all I had for today. Take care for now, and see you on the next time.